Well, hello everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Learning the Basics of On-Cost Project Estimating within Construction Online. Today's session, Estimating 101, is the first part of a two-part series where we will be demonstrating how to build and manage estimates in Construction Online. Whether you're new to the platform or looking to sharpen your process, you're in the right place. If you're with us live today or catching the recording back later, we're glad you're here. Construction estimating. If you've been in this industry for any length of time, you already know that a good estimate can make a project and a bad one can break it. It's where the financial side of a job really starts to take shape. The good news is Construction Online's on-cost estimating is built to make that process faster, more accurate, and connected to the rest of your project, from winning the job to final invoicing. I'm Ivy Cole, a technical writer here at UDA Technologies, and I'm joined today by my colleague, Carly Orlando, a senior success coordinator on our customer success team.
Hi everyone, I'm really glad to be here. Estimating is one of my very favorite topics because it touches absolutely everything in construction online. And I think by the end of today, you guys will have a clearer sense of how all of the financial pictures in construction online fit together.
Yeah, before we dive in, a little more context for anyone newer to Construction Online. Construction Online is an all-in-one construction management platform used by construction professionals to manage projects, financial workflows, and day-to-day coordination. And at the center of the system's financial toolkit is on-cost estimating, which is included with every active Construction Online subscription. All right, Carly, let's start at the beginning. What is a construction estimate?
Yeah, Ivy, so at its simplest, its most basic, a construction estimate is a detailed projection of what a project is going to cost, broken down by materials, labor, equipment, and then adding overhead and profit margin. It is the document that turns your scope of work into numbers that a client can review, approve, and ultimately sign off on. But it's more than just a price tag. A well built estimate becomes the baseline your team uses to plan the work and track costs as the project moves forward. In Construction Online, it also acts as a central financial reference for the project.
And because of that, the quality of the estimate affects everything that follows. A rushed estimate doesn't just create problems at the proposal stage, it carries through the entire job. That's really what sets integrated estimating apart from managing a standalone spreadsheet. In a spreadsheet, the estimate exists in isolation. Changes have to be carried forward manually. Carly, before we get into the demonstration within Construction Online, can you walk us through exactly what the estimate connects to within the financial workflow?
Yeah, Ivy, and my favorite way of explaining this is that Construction Online basically serves as the starting point and the financial repository for pretty much everything in Construction Online. So from the beginning, you're building out your estimate, you're starting to get your categories, subcategories, and items in. You've got your allowances that hook back up to your estimate. When you're actually creating that estimate, you have the option to use bids to go ahead and pull pricing so you know what that is going to look like. You can actually put change orders on top of estimate subcategories so that when the scope shifts, you have the ability to track it. You can do job costing through the purchasing and invoicing features. We have a red line takeoff feature that you can actually use to pull values back into your construction online directly from your plans. And even for larger jobs, especially commercial jobs, we actually offer now a pay app feature. So you're actually able to take some of the work that's in your estimate and generate pay applications from them. Proposals can be generated right from the estimate as well. So even from the very beginning, when you're still in the pre-construction phase, that estimate is really going to be powerful for making sure all your financials are taken care of within Construction Online. So there's no rekeying numbers between systems. There's no going in and trying to balance multiple spreadsheets. That's something I see a lot of my success clients doing when they first come to me. They have multiple spreadsheets and it's really confusing trying to keep them all updated and accurate. With Construction Online, like I said, there's no rekeying of those numbers. Everything builds off of what is there in that estimate spreadsheet.
Yeah, and those downstream connections are only as strong as the estimate feeding them, which is why how you build that estimate matters just as much as what's in it. And Construction Online gives teams some real tools for doing that efficiently and accurately. What are the benefits teams actually feel day to day when they're working in on-cost estimating, Carly?
Yeah, Ivy. So, kind of like I said previously, I am a success coordinator. And so, one of the things that I do is my job is to make sure that when my clients come to me and they're getting started with Construction Online, that they are able to implement it effectively and efficiently. And kind of one of the biggest place that I see people get really good return on investment from Construction Online pretty early is within Construction Online is the estimating feature. There's a few things that really move that needle. So to begin, you have speed. So when you're building estimates in Construction Online, you're not starting from scratch every time. You can go ahead and have template structures that you can reuse across similar projects with options to import from Excel if that's what you were previously using. You have options to use cost books that you can go ahead and preload items and pricing into so you can keep that consistent. And people who use those tools consistently can really cut down on the amount of time that they're taking building estimates, generating proposals, and sending those out to clients, which translates to real world ability to actually get more jobs, manage those jobs more effectively, and actually start increasing your profit margins. The second place that I see people really start to powerfully use Construction Online's estimating is accuracy. So when you're looking in Construction Online, that cost data is going to live in a centralized cost book. It stays current. So instead of hunting down the right price in your old spreadsheet, you're pulling from a source that reflects your actual costs. You're going to also be able to go in and see that estimate consistently throughout the entire project. So instead of pulling from a source that may reflect changes or like an older version one of a spreadsheet, you're continually using the same spreadsheet, which reduces errors. It means your estimates are more defensible when clients ask questions. And when it comes time to do your job costing, you're getting accurate numbers. Ivy, a common piece of feedback we get is that for a lot of people who have not used an estimating program when they first start, they don't know if they're on the red and like in the red on a job until tax time. So it becomes a really big problem when they realize they've actually lost money on a project because they didn't have accurate job costing, because they didn't have an accurate estimate. So that's the kind of the second biggest area of value. And the third is profitability. So on-cost estimating gives you built-in tools for markup at both the line item level and for setting company overhead and margin, as well as calculating tax. So you're not just covering your basic costs, you're also protecting your bottom line and ensuring that you're getting a good value out of the projects that you're doing.
And today you're going to see exactly how all of that works. By the end of this webinar, you'll know how to build and organize a detailed construction estimate inside Construction Online, add allowances to your account for cost variables, configure your tax settings to match your business needs, apply markup and margin to protect your profitability, and generate a professional proposal, all without leaving the platform. All right, Carly, take it away.
Yeah, so I'm going to go ahead and you will be able to see now that I am within one of my projects on Construction Online. So when you're navigating to the estimating feature within a project for the first time, you're going to be prompted to create a new estimate. And right away, you have options because we recognize that different teams work differently and different projects call for different starting points. So if you're going to select the Add New Estimate button, when you do this, the first option is to create an estimate from scratch using Create a Blank Estimate. This is going to give you a blank spreadsheet-like form workbook where you can actually build up your estimate by hand from the ground up. So you can control the categories, subcategories, and line items as you go. You're going to also be able to create whatever you want pretty much in terms of structure using that category, subcategory, and line item. So it's the most flexible starting point, especially for highly custom, like custom home jobs or for one-of-a-kind projects. The second option is creating from a template. If your company has saved estimate templates, which we usually recommend, and that's one of the things I help people set up pretty early, you can actually choose one and immediately start working from a preloaded structure. So that's going to include things like your standard categories, your typical line items, and even your preferred markup settings. So it's a huge time saver if you're using those estimate templates. And third, you have the option to import from Excel. So like I said, if you've previously been using a spreadsheet like system like Excel and you are kind of looking to move to Construction Online's estimating, if you've been building those estimates in a spreadsheet, we actually have a downloadable import template you can actually import into Construction Online that will build an estimate for you. So it's a clean path for teams making kind of that transition.
Okay, so for today's demonstration, which method will we be using?
Great question, Ivy. So, kind of to demonstrate the power of Construction Online and give everyone a really good idea of the full process of creating, we're going to be starting from scratch. You'll get to see the full process of creating an empty estimate, You'll get to see the process of adding categories, subcategories, and you're going to really understand that structure. So what we'll do is we're just going to hit continue. And our first step is to set our name and cost codes. So we can go ahead and establish our estimate name. That is going to include typically the name of the project and the estimate. Some people like to customize this a little bit. Some people have internal naming systems for their estimates. You can customize that here. You're also going to have the ability to go in and if you want to use cost codes, you have the ability to actually assign those. So you would be able to do that. Your next step is to set up the estimate structure. So from this tab, you're going to notice that by default, on-cost estimates are set up as three-level standard estimates. That is what we were talking about when we referred to kind of those three tiers. So you have categories at the top. You can think of these as broad areas of work like site work, framing, or electrical. Subcategories are going to go underneath that. So those are going to be different phases or maybe smaller scopes that fall within that general umbrella. And then underneath that, you're going to have your individual lines and your individual items. Those are going to be the individual materials, labor, or equipment entries that are going to make up the bulk of your cost. So think about this as going from very broad to very granular. You're going to have a header, a subheader, and then your actual items. Alongside this three-level structure, you're going to also see that the default calculation method is standard. Standard is exactly what it sounds like. Your line item base cost is calculated by multiplying the unit cost by the quantity. It's worth knowing that these are the recommended selections for estimate structure because the three-level structure and standard calculation method are going to be requirements if you plan on using pretty much any other feature within Construction Online financially, including your cost books, items database, assemblies, redline takeoff, the on-point proposal wizard. Pretty much everything's going to come back to how this estimate's going to be set up. And again, that recommended method is three-level with standard calculation.
All right, so the structure is set. What's next?
Yeah, so now we're going to go ahead and establish our tax settings. So when we're encountering our tax settings, this is where we're going to define how taxes are calculated for that specific estimate. So these settings can be configured differently from project to project, which is exactly what you need when you're working across different jurisdictions. Ivy, I work with some people in the Northwest, Pacific Northwest. I work with several Canadian companies across different provinces. I work with companies in the Northeast, Florida, California. I even have a couple companies that are out in Australia or maybe even in Europe. So for them, being able to customize their tax settings is really important because they have so many different needs. One of my Canadian clients, they work in multiple provinces, so they're going to have different tax requirements for each province that a project can be in. So what we're going to focus on first is our calculation method. The default is set to where your tax will apply and then your markup. So taxes are going to be applied before markup is calculated. You can also, depending on how your contracts are structured or local like jurisdiction and tax law, you can also choose to do markup and then tax or keep tax and markup completely separate. And you can just do this by selecting your option from the drop-down menu. We also do have the option to show different tax settings for different countries, United States, Canada, Australia, United Kingdom, or other. But if you want to go in and customize it either way, you will actually be able to just go in and select this little edit icon. You can set up the name of the tax type. You can set up different subtypes and different taxes and have as many of those as you need to. So whether that's sales tax, use tax, GST, PST, HST, or something else specific to your jurisdiction, you're going to actually be able to populate those tax rates based on your selected tax type. You can also use the subtype percentages. Those are going to roll up automatically, or you can enter a rate manually.
And once the settings are in place, they apply consistently across the estimate, so there's no manual tax calculation happening at the line item level. You set it once at the front end, and the system handles it from there. For teams working in states with layered tax requirements, that consistency alone saves a meaningful amount of time and reduces the risk of an error slipping through a large estimate. So, with the structure and tax settings established, the estimate is ready to build. Let's talk about what that actually looks like.
Yeah, so Ivy, when we hit save, it is going to go ahead and generate our Construction Online estimate for us. And you can kind of see that it does give you a basis to work with. You're going to have a couple categories that are already thrown in there, as well as some subcategories. So we're going to work directly in this spreadsheet. I'm actually going to hide my estimate sidebar so that people can have a better view as they're viewing this webinar. You can reopen that at any time, but in the right upper right-hand corner, selecting Show Estimate Sidebar. So when we're looking in Construction Online, when we are adding these categories, again, that's going to be our most broad. So when we're on our project totals page, it's going to show us kind of just our headers, category and subcategory. And we're actually going to be able to go in and select add category. We can add as many of those as we need. If we need to rename it at any point, I can select the little pen icon when I'm hovering over it and just type in my new category name. Under each category, your subcategories are going to break that area down. So if we're thinking of like the GSI codes, we may have our Division 1 be general requirements. That's going to usually fall into the actual category section, whereas subcategories may include things like the planning section, planning cost codes, or your permitting cost codes, general requirements, stuff like that. So that's kind of that first step for getting all of that information in. Once we have that done, you'll notice here at the bottom that each of those categories are going to create their own tab. We can click on those tabs. That's actually going to open it up so we can go in and add our individual line items. So those are going to be that, like I said, the individual materials, labor entries, and equipment costs that make up that scope.
And this is where cost books really start to show their value. Rather than typing in a unit cost from memory or going to dig it up somewhere else, the data is already there. Carly, can you show us how that works?
Yeah, so if you already have cost books set up in your company account, you can actually go into that estimate sidebar and you can select enable cost book items. And from that point, when you're actually typing in an item, you're going to be able to just type something in. So let's say if we wanted to do um, a heat pump, I can go ahead and type that in, and it's actually going to pull up all of my items that include that along with the unit cost. So it's just really quick and easy to just pop those in. If I'm really not sure how I've named that item in my cost book, I can also select this little box. That's going to pop out the cost book as its own little window, and then I can go and select whatever I need from that cost book section. For teams that haven't set up cost books yet, this is one of the highest return investments you can make in the estimating process because you're doing that upfront work of loading your items, and then the pricing pays off on every estimate you build after that.
It also protects against pricing drift that happens when costs are living in someone's head or in a separate spreadsheet that hasn't been updated in 6 months. Centralizing that data in the cost book means everyone on your team is working from the same numbers.
Yeah, Ivy, and that's a great point because when those numbers do need to change, let's say a supplier raises their prices, labor costs shift. We saw some of this during COVID where there were like rapidly changing material markets. Those are the types of things that you're really going to see directly within your pricing that's going to affect your estimate and your bottom line. So if you're using a cost book, you can actually update the pricing directly in the cost book and you can choose how far that update reaches. So if we're working in this section, if I decide that I've updated my cost book and I need to refresh all of the pricing, I can hit refresh item costs and that's going to update all of those cost book items to their newest pricing when I'm putting that in the estimate. So a really, really great value. You can apply it just to the current estimates and once you have updated the pricing, when you go to add those cost book items to future estimates, that's automatically going to pull and work from that current number. So a lot of teams quietly save themselves from a recurring problem by updating future estimates. If your unit costs live in a cost book and you update them once, you're done. You're not hunting through old estimates trying to remember which template still has a stale price in it.
Mm. And if individual items are one way to pull from that cost book, assemblies take that a step further, right, Carly?
Yeah, exactly. So when we're thinking about assemblies, a cost book item is going to give you a single line. That assembly lets you actually pull in a whole group of related items at once. So it keeps your estimates consistent across projects and cuts down time rebuilding the same scopes from scratch. We're actually going to be going deeper into setting up and managing both cost books and assemblies and estimating 102. So if you want to get the most out of those tools, I would recommend checking out that one as well.
Definitely. What else can be captured at the line item level beyond cost data?
Yeah, Ivy, so when we're looking at this screen, there's quite a bit we can do here. So going over a couple of things. Each category, subcategory, or item supports descriptions. So you have a box for descriptions that you can add detailed scope notes directly alongside your cost data. That's useful both internally for your team and externally when the information surfaces in a proposal. You also have the ability to go through and apply classifications to line items, whether that's labor, material, subcontractor, equipment, other, or even if it's unclassified. And you can even apply classification based markup so that different types of work are priced at the appropriate margin. We're going to get more into markup in just a little bit, but there's a couple other basic tools that we can look at when it comes to line items. We have a notes section right here where you can actually go in. You can add general notes, team link notes, client link notes, and takeoff notes. You have an attachments tab where you can actually go in and upload any attachments so you can connect files directly to that line item. Maybe you have a specification list, maybe you have cut sheets, reference drawings, as well as an image that you need to upload for what that item should look like. All of that supporting documentation can live directly there rather than kind of being in a random folder where you have to go hunting for it.
So the estimate isn't just a cost document, it's also a reference point for the whole project team. Everything tied to a scope of work is accessible from the same place.
Yeah, exactly, Ivy. And an important thing that I want to note here is that this view of the estimate is going to be for primarily like firm embedded costs. So when we're getting those firmer costs of pricing materials, subcontractor bids, stuff like that, that's what's going to be that goes in the estimate. One question that I sometimes get as a success coordinator is what about my allowances? We actually have a feature for specifically managing allowances called our client selections feature. The client selections feature allows you to build out client selection categories, selections, and selection choices so that your clients can kind of easily select what types of fixtures and finishes they want in their project. Now, the majority of that is actually going to be done through your client selections feature. You're going to go build out all of your allowances there. If you have already built out your allowances there, no worries, you do not have to add them in as individual line items. Because if we go through and we choose to build them directly in the client selections feature, we have the ability to view those allowances within the estimate by navigating to the end of the estimate. If we look down here, there is a selections tab. It is purple. And if you're looking at your project totals page, you can actually scroll to see this purple line. When you click it, it is actually going to break down each of those client selection categories, the selection itself, what the client is choosing, and then what selection choice has been made available. If the client selection choice has not already been chosen, then you have the option to go in and actually see those pending approvals here. And you can see what the original allowance amount was, what was approved, and what the overall net is on any of those values in terms of client overages or if they have gone under what you're anticipating them spending.
Okay, let's talk about markup now, because that's where the estimate goes from covering costs to actually building in profit.
Yeah, Ivy, great point. So when we're thinking about overhead, margin, markup, all of those types of things, there's kind of two layers of profitability built into on-cost estimating, and it's worth understanding how they work together. The first is going to be line item markup. So when we're looking at an individual line item, if we scroll to the right, we have the ability to go in and actually add a markup to that line item. That is only going to apply to that specific line item. It is not going to apply to everything. And you have different markup types. So you have percentages, fixed amounts, you have dollars per unit. You can do classification markups, and you can also do percent margin. So if you need to take any of those on those individual line items, you are actually able to do so. That's useful when certain scopes of work carry a different margin target for the rest of the project. The second layer to this is actually going to be in company overhead and margin. Just like the client selections portion, you're going to actually be able to select that as its own tab. Coming to this, you have 5 company overhead and margin lines. They're by default named overhead, margin, contingency, other one, and other two. You can actually choose how you want to go in and name them. They are customizable. And then with that company overhead and margin, that's a dedicated section of the estimate for the cost and profit that apply at the project level rather than the line item level.
And this is the section that a lot of teams either underuse or handle inconsistently, which is one of the more common places margin gets left on the table. Can you walk us through a little more in depth about company overhead and margin?
Yeah, absolutely. So when we're thinking about company overhead and margin, thinking about each of these line items and kind of what you can use them for. So we already talked about what they consist of: overhead, margin, contingency, other one, and other two.
Mhm.
Again, these are customizable names, so if you need to go in and update them, you're absolutely able to. But kind of why we have it set up like this is that overhead is going to kind of cover indirect business costs. So expenses that aren't tied to a specific job, but you still kind of have to account for them. That may include stuff like rent, utilities, insurance, workers' comp insurance that you're paying for your team, administrative labor, people who are working in the office that actually aren't on the job site at any given moment. So pretty much anything that's going to fall outside of your normal purview of just not just items that you need to accommodate for in terms of what you're expecting your burden to be with that specific project, but your business as a whole. Now, margin is going to be desired profit. So overhead is going to kind of cover all of that extra stuff that you need to make sure that you're not in the red running these jobs. But margin is actually going to be where you're going to start to collect profit and revenue. Contingency, that usually acts as a buffer for unexpected overages. So if you accidentally do go over, you have something to pull from without having to make a change order. And then you have actually the ability to do other one and other two. So if you have something that doesn't fit neatly into the overhead, margin, or contingency categories, you can use other one and other two to make sure that you're accommodating those extra costs. One of my favorite ways and my favorite recommendations for actually utilizing other one and other two is I usually see people, and I encourage people to do this, actually have other one be renamed to something like software fee or software administration, and you can actually put your construction online price into the other column. That way you're acknowledging construction online is a piece of my overhead that I can get reimbursed through my jobs. And usually by the end of the year, if you're doing that, construction online has actually paid for itself, and you have not really spent any additional extra on construction online because you have actually included that in your profit margin.
I love that, Carly. That's great advice.
Yeah. So when we're thinking about this, each component is calculated one of three ways. So you have your percent of cost, that's going to kind of be your most upfront. Percent of cost is it calculates the component as a percentage of your estimate total. So whatever your estimate subtotal is, it's going to take a percentage of that. That's your percent of cost. Percent margin's a little different. That's going to be more of a proportional percentage. So it's going to equal an exact percentage of the final number, and it accounts for values of other company overhead and margin components. So the estimate grows, other components are added, the margin is going to continually adjust so that it keeps that proportional value. And fixed amount, that's exactly what it sounds like. If you want a $20,000 contingency and you don't want to think too hard about it, you can throw it into fixed amount, put $20,000 on there, and you are all good to go. So if there's also like flat equipment rentals or anything that you need to worry about like that, you can go ahead and include those.
So you have a real flexibility in how each component is calculated, and each one can be set independently. For teams that are working on a mix of project types, that matters. A cost plus job is going to be structured differently than a fixed price contract, and a company overhead and margin can accommodate for both. Let's look at how the estimate view itself can be customized because how you're looking at the data changes depending on where you are in the process.
Yeah, absolutely, Ivy. And this is a really cool feature, and I think it's really underutilized, at least by my clients. Within Construction Online, if you navigate to the View tab, you actually have 5 drop-down menus that you can go in and you can fully customize. So thinking about these 5 drop-downs, they're kind of preset for you. You have your budget, your simple estimate, your advanced estimate, job costing, and invoicing. So when we are looking at each of these views, I can actually customize the columns that are showing so that if I ever need to quickly flip back and forth, I know exactly what fields I'm using or what fields I need to see. So say you're actively building an estimate, you're on advanced estimate or simple estimate, those are going to tend to work best because they keep the fields you're filling in most actively front and center. You can use job costing or budget to kind of track costs as the project progresses and get a bigger financial picture. And the invoicing view is particularly useful later in the project lifecycle when you're tracking what's been billed against what you've actually been paid to ensure that you're getting the value that you're putting into the job. So beyond the preset views, you also have the ability, like I said, to show hide columns. You can right click on any column header and hit show hide to go ahead and choose what's going to show. You can go in and drag and drop to rearrange, and that's a great way of doing it, and you can do that for each of the 5 views, and those will pre-save. So, really great things. You'll notice that there's a lot in the show hive that we may not have gone over today in terms of columns, but we actually do plan on going over that next session, which is next week.
Yep. And that flexibility matters more than it might seem at first. When you're deep in data entry, having columns you don't need visible is just noise. And when you're in review mode, seeing too many internal fields can actually make it harder to spot what you're looking at. Being able to shift the view based on the task means the estimate is working for you at every stage, not just when you're building it. Before we move into the broader toolkit, what are some of the best practices that users should start thinking through before they start to build instead of after, Carly?
Yeah, so there's a couple questions that I always like to mention to my teams when we're kind of thinking about getting started with estimating. The first is if you're planning to integrate the estimate using any sort of construction online, um, with like QuickBooks Online, QuickBooks Desktop, any sort of accounting integration. Um, if you are planning on integrating Construction Online with an accounting system like QuickBooks Desktop or QuickBooks Online, I cannot stress highly enough how much templates are going to come in handy. That is going to make sure that all of the items match between every estimate, and it's going to ensure that those matching items stay in your QuickBooks items list. So you're keeping a level of consistency that's going to really help your QuickBooks not quickly become overwhelmed with additional products and services or line items. And it's going to make sure that you're kind of using the same general structure so that when you're running your reports out of QuickBooks, it's super easy to go back and check for just a specific category or subcategory. Second option is, are you planning on using Redline Takeoff? If you are planning on using Redline Takeoff, as we already said, you need to ensure that you're on that three-level estimate and you're using that standard calculation method. Takeoff measurements work at the individual line item, so you're dealing with units, quantities, and unit costs. I always highly recommend going ahead and setting up your cost books early, especially if you plan on using Redline Takeoff. It is actually going to be really beneficial for you to use those cost books because that pricing is just going to pop right into your Construction Online estimate when it comes time to save. Third, are you planning on using cost books or assemblies? That kind of goes with the previous one. If you're using those are going to be built around individual line items and they cannot function without that level of detail in the estimate structure. So going ahead and building out that cost book early, ensuring you understand how to input those items, and making sure those cost books are effectively labeled are going to be really important when we're considering the overarching how to use our estimate.
Yeah, so Carly, those three questions really come down to one underlying principle. The choices you make when you create the estimate determine what's available to you as the project moves forward. The good news is that the estimate creation wizard actually walks you through these considerations when you're getting started, so you're prompted to think about these things before you build rather than running into a wall later. What you've built doesn't stay in the estimate. It becomes the financial engine for everything that follows. Let's walk through what that actually looks like, Carly.
Yeah, I mean, so when we're thinking about construction online, we're emphasizing the connections of on-cost estimating with the larger financial toolkit, and I really want to drive home how those connections are so important so our viewers understand that. And the best way to do that is to follow the order they actually show up in the project. So it starts before the estimate is even built. Redline Takeoff is Construction Online's built-in cloud-based takeoff tool. If you've been using a separate takeoff tool, maybe that's going to be Bluebeam, maybe it's going to be PlanSwift. If you wanted to transfer over, Construction Online does have a Redline takeoff system built into it directly, and you're actually going to be able to upload your construction plans directly into the platform, perform your takeoff measurements, and then actually send those measurements, quantities, unit types, associated items, all in all directly into the estimate. No export, no reformatting, no manual entry. It is just the data flows straight in. It's fully integrated, and those updates to your takeoff can be resent without rebuilding anything. For teams where quantities drive those estimates, that removes one of the most error-prone steps in the process.
Okay, so Redline feeds the estimate from the front end. And once that estimate is built, the next step is putting it in front of the client, which is where the proposal wizard comes in.
Right, and we actually have a great webinar that we've actually done pretty recently, Ivy, on the OnCost OnPoint Proposal Wizard. The OnPoint Proposal Wizard, it's going to generate proposals directly from whatever you're putting in the estimate. You choose what to include, you customize the formatting and branding, and you produce a polished professional document that's ready to send without touching a separate tool or reformatting anything manually. So thinking about those two things that we just discussed, you can actually easily go to Redline Takeoff right here directly through your estimate. When it comes time to run your proposal, you can actually flip over to reports and hit create proposal. That's kind of a good way to see how integrated this is. It's all easily accessible from within the Construction Online estimate itself. And there are predefined formats within that proposal for you to work from. Once you've configured one to match how your company presets work, you can actually save it as a preset, and every proposal after that will follow the same structure. So you can preset that branding, ensure everything's going to remain consistent.
Yep, and that consistency is worth more than it might seem on the surface. A proposal that looks professional, matches your brand, reflects accurate numbers from the estimate you've already built, that's the document a client is signing off on. Getting that right the first time sets the tone for the entire job. And once the job is awarded, the estimate connection keeps moving forward, now into how you're managing your subcontractors and vendors.
Yeah, Ivy, and that's where our new bid tracking feature comes in. So, if we're thinking about the process of building out an estimate and getting really accurate pricing, some people prefer to do this part before you generate a proposal and send it off. Some people prefer to do it after. Either way, the bid tracking feature in Construction Online allows you to manage the process of soliciting and comparing bids from subcontractors and vendors. You're creating bid packages that go out to bidders, and within each package, you're defining the scope using bid sheets. So instead of building the scope from scratch, you can pull up categories, subcategories, and line items directly from your estimate. That's going to keep your subcontractors' pricing aligned with how you're already structuring your costs. Estimate descriptions often even carry over automatically, so everything stays consistent. Once bids come in, you can compare them side by side and award the work. And from there, you can generate a purchase order awarded directly from that bid.
So the estimate isn't just internal, it's already shaping how you're collecting and evaluating prices from your subs. Let's stay on that path and move into purchasing, because once work is awarded, that estimate connection carries forward.
Yeah, Ivy, and with purchasing, once your estimate is in place, you can generate purchase orders directly from your estimate line items or from awarded bids. You're not re-entering data into a separate system. You're not recreating or the wheel. You're going in and you're working from the same numbers that you've already built and you've already pre-approved. When bills come in against those purchase orders, you can actually track that. Those costs will land in the right place for job costing. That's what's going to give you a real-time view of how your actual costs are tracking against your estimate.
And that's where you start to see whether a job is holding or starting to drift. Let's move into invoicing, because now we're shifting from tracking costs to billing for the work.
Yeah, absolutely. So as work progresses, invoices you generate in Construction Online are going to reference that same financial data that your estimate established. That connection is going to be what powers the estimate versus invoiced report, and that's going to show you a lot of those budgeted lines, how those have been billed, and how much remains. So instead of cross-checking invoices against a separate estimate, everything's already tied together so you can see the full picture in one spot. And one thing that I really want to point out about all of this is if we take a step back and we're thinking of Construction Online's estimate as our general repository for everything. When I'm looking in these line items, I'm going in, I'm adding my base costs, I'm adding my unity, I'm adding my quantities. I'm going in, I'm getting all of my contract pricing. All of that is being filtered through this estimate. At any point, I'm able to see those based on the column headings that I'm showing. So when we talked earlier about adjusting our column views, I'm able to see that directly within the estimate itself. There are columns for invoiced, columns for actuals, columns for committed. There's columns where you can see what's been billed to date. There are remaining budget columns. There are going to be columns for pretty much anything that you can think of. We are going to get into a lot of that in Estimating 102, but I just want to make that really clear to everyone, kind of as we're finishing up the webinar, that the Construction Online estimate is designed to be a resource for you. It is not designed to be extra work. It is not designed to make your life difficult. It is designed specifically to make it where you can see all of your data in one place really effectively. And if you are not using the estimating software, I'd highly recommend it because you're going to get more accurate pricing. You're not going to go under on as many jobs. It's going to be easier to track your budgets, and it's going to be a lot easier to manage costing for your construction. And ultimately, that's what you need. You're collecting pricing on this. This is how you're keeping your business running. We cannot underrepresent enough how much a good estimate is going to support you moving forward. So, Ivy, I know we've covered quite a bit today. Looks like we're kind of running to the end of our time. We still got a lot to cover in Estimating 102. Do you mind closing us out of the first part of the series?
Of course, we sure did cover a lot. Estimating is available within all active subscriptions to Construction Online, with some of those connected financial toolkit tools becoming available based on the subscription's tier level. If you have any questions regarding your access to features or anything regarding Construction Online at all, you can always get details at constructiononline.com or connect with one of our support team members and they'll point you in the right direction. For those of you who are ready to take your estimating skills even further, we've teased it a lot already. If you haven't registered, we love for you to join us in the second part of this series, Estimating 102, Advance Your On-Cost Estimating Skills. We'll be going beyond the basics, covering how to manage and update estimates across the project lifecycle, track change orders, and use cost books and assemblies to their full potential. That's next Thursday, April 23rd at the same exact time, 12 p.m. Eastern. Thanks again for joining us today, everyone. And Carly, thank you so much for walking us through today's demonstration.
My pleasure, guys. It was great talking to you guys about this, and I want to take a moment to thank everyone for joining. We're going to see you in part two. If you signed up for this webinar, we did get a question about this. If you signed up, you are actually going to get a recorded version sent to your email. If for some reason you ever need to come back to it after that and you've actually lost your email or whatever, no worries. That's going to be available on our YouTube channel. We are at UDA Technologies on YouTube. Not only can you find all of our webinars there, you're also going to be able to find all of our general training videos. It's a great resource. We're constantly working on getting that updated, so a great thing for you to check out. And if you ever want to check anything else out, when it comes to Construction Online, we do have a red help button. We have a knowledge base in there, and we are happy to support you as you're building out these estimates, whether that's through a training session, through articles, through videos. So anything that we can do to support you, we're more than happy to assist with. I hope everyone has a really wonderful day today. I hope that you guys are able to come and check out Estimating 102. And if you need anything at all, please feel free to reach out to us. Have a great day, guys.
Bye, guys.